Draft capital matters. I think the best two recent examples of this is looking at guys like Clyde Edwards-Helaire and James Robinson. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was a first-round pick for the Kansas City Chiefs just a couple seasons back. Think of how long the Kansas City Chiefs tried to make him work, and he was ineffective the entire time. And then think of a guy like James Robinson. In his rookie year, when Travis Etienne was not there, he was such a dominator and a fantasy league winner for so many people. But since he went undrafted, they drafted Travis Etienne in the next year in the first round. And then Travis Etienne went down, and James Robinson still had a good season, and James Robinson is basically out of the league at this point. Draft capital matters. And as we approach the draft, there's going to be some guys that are going to be affected by the NFL draft, have their spots taken just because there just isn't that much team investment in these guys. Now, we're going through 4 sell-high players in Dynasty today, but I want to make this clear, not all of the guys on this list today are going to be in bad shape just because of draft capital alone. There's some of that, especially with this first guy that I'm going to get into. But first, this is a new channel exclusively for Dynasty Fantasy Football, so please make sure to go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to this channel to show your support if you get value from this video today. So the first guy, as I just said, he's going to be affected, I do believe, by draft capital, whether it's this year or whether it's the following year. I'm looking at Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals, and I'm saying to myself, this guy all of a sudden has a decent amount of draft capital attached to him in Dynasty Fantasy Football when you look at startup drafts. And also at the same time, he's got a pretty decent amount of dynasty value as a whole. So what I want to look at here when it comes to Chase Brown specifically is that this guy is a 5th round pick for the Cincinnati Bengals. Not only is he a 5th round pick, he's actually an older player. Chase Brown did not come into the league as a young buck. He's going to be 24 in March of this year. So it's not that that's old or anything like that, but he's not 21, 22, 23. Right? So Chase Brown is already a little bit out of disadvantage from an age perspective here. Now, the other thing that we need to look at here is Joe Mixon. I actually said a couple of weeks ago that I don't believe he's going to be a Bengal in 2023. I think that they're going to cut him or restructure a contract or do something that is going to affect the backfield. I don't necessarily think he's going to be on the team. Now, he is under contract, so theoretically, like, he could still be a Bengal in 2024. But what I think is going to happen is we're going to see a guy like Chase Brown, as the offseason goes, get more and more hyped as a good dynasty running back. Here's my problem, though. Chase Brown, being a 5th round draft pick, when you look at those numbers right there, they're actually pretty good. Like, he came in, especially towards the end of the season in 2023, provided some real fantasy value. Like, in best ball leagues, he actually had some pretty good pull towards those last several weeks when he was getting more touches on the ground. And, you know, this is a player that I do believe that it reminds me of a little bit of Tyler Algier. Tyler Algier got drafted very similar draft capital to Chase Brown a couple years back for Atlanta. And in his rookie year, he was actually way more involved than Chase Brown was in his rookie year. And then the offseason hits, and it's like this guy all of a sudden has lots of draft capital. And I actually at the time remember saying, you should buy Tyler Algier, and that was a bad call by me. The reason why is because they drafted Bijan Robinson in the first round the very next year. Now, I'm not saying that there's a Bijan Robinson in this class that Cincinnati can grab, and I don't think this is a particularly strong draft class for running backs. What I'm saying, though, is Chase Brown has a very slim chance of amounting to really much of anything. So once people figure it out that he's going to be a career backup / change of pace back, his value is going to drop back down to not exactly where it was before the season, but it's going to drop down below where it is today. So for me, I'd rather just cash in on Chase Brown, come away with a guy in the 2nd round. I'd rather try to get a mid to low 2nd round pick so I can use that and get a guy in a deep wide receiver class, someone in the range of Xavier Worthy in this particular class, right? Polk should be in that range too. So I would rather personally just sell it while I can right now, while his price is still relatively decent, and just go ahead and level up your players to a player that you believe has a better shot of having better draft capital in the NFL and being a better dynasty player. So the next guy up here on this list, I think that this guy is such a polarizing player no matter how you call it. There's going to be people who are 49ers fans across this country who are just going to disagree with this take entirely, and across the world, really, because the 49ers have such a large fan base, and Deebo Samuel is loved by 49ers fans. And let me be clear, if we're watching football and Deebo Samuel is at his healthiest, I like Deebo Samuel as a player. I think he's very fun to watch. I think he's a very, very entertaining player. And he's had some very good fantasy success. Like, on the screen you can see right now, you can see that 2021 season obviously was elite. In full PPR, he was the number 3 wide receiver. And this year, he was the wide receiver 15, put up some really massive games for some people. But I want to highlight something here with Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel, let's look closer at the numbers on the screen right now. So this is his reception yards and his reception stats right here we're looking at. He's got one season over 1,000 yards receiving. Yet he's been a top 15 wide receiver in fantasy football 2 out of those, 5 years. 2021 makes sense, right? 1,400 receiving yards and 120 targets, right? That makes sense that he was the wide receiver 3. In 2023, the wide receiver 15, and he didn't even cross 900 yards. What's going on here? You know how many wide receivers are getting 1,000 plus yards per season now? Over 15. It's about 20 wide receivers per year. Even more than that, actually. So what's the difference here? Well, obviously, if you watch football, you know that Deebo Samuel's a running wide receiver. He's not even what many would call a true wide receiver. This guy is more of a versatile player, kind of a jack of all trades in his offense. And I think that he's in the perfect offense for him because Kyle Shanahan knows exactly how to use him. Let's take a look at his rushing stats right here. So in 2021, obviously that was his big season. He had 8 touchdowns on the ground right here. 2022, 2023, he's had 8 more touchdowns between those 2 years. So this guy is getting obviously a lot of production in the running game. Now, my other big gripe with Deebo Samuel is that this guy's volume and his production is a little harder to track, obviously because of the rushing upside that he presents most years. But the other problem I have with it is that this guy's 28 years old and he's been banged up every single year. He has not finished a full season, not once in his career. Now, granted, he's really only missed like the majority of the year in one season in 2020. Most of the other seasons, it's been like a game here, a couple games here. It's nothing too crazy. But this is a guy who's getting to the age where it's like, do we really want to keep playing this Russian roulette game? Because that's how I feel when I have Deebo Samuel on a roster. Am I willing to take the shot? And most of the times, yes, in the past several years, because he's very high upside. And I still do believe he will be. But this guy is not some ascending dynasty asset. And he's still coming off a very good year. So I would prefer to just go ahead and sell this guy. Try to get somewhere, in the back of the first round, maybe a second round pick and some other veteran established player that we know can be very good and has a little bit more upside. I would think of a guy like Christian Kirk, getting him in addition to a second round pick. I would think about getting a guy like Jaden Reed, a young player with a second round pick here. I just prefer to move younger off of Deebo Samuel because I just don't really trust his dynasty value moving forward. The next guy in this list right here is going to get personal because you can see Steelers gear in the back of this video right now. Jack Lambert right over my shoulder right here. Steelers snapback back here. I'm a Steelers fan and I have been all my life. I got family in Pittsburgh. I'm a Yinzer at heart. But I always say fantasy football analysis comes first before being a Steelers fan. And I got to tell you guys, sell George Pickens right now. Now, let me discuss this because I know this one's going to be contested. I know for a fact this one's going to be contested. There's a number of different angles as to why he would be a sell high player for me. So George Pickens, you can see on the screen right here, his season numbers per game basis, and you can also see where he finished in 2023 versus 2022. He had finished 9 spots higher, so he was a bit of a breakout player in 2023. He had 300 plus more yards receiving than he did in 2022 in the same amount of games, almost 1,150 receiving yards, and 106 targets. Like, there's no question, before I move any further, that this guy is super talented. I like the player. I think he's a tremendous talent at the wide receiver position. And he obviously produced very well, especially when it counted in the fantasy football playoffs this year. I want to attack a specific angle here, though. Over the years, if you are very well connected to the football world, which I'm sure the majority of people watching are, you've probably heard that a lot of analysts on ESPN or wherever else you hear it are always ones that say, well, the Pittsburgh Steelers are excellent at drafting and developing wide receiver talent. So I agree with one of those points. I think they are very good at drafting wide receiver talent. I think they frequently identify very good talent in wide receivers in every single draft. I do not agree with this development thing, though. They're simply not very good at developing wide receivers, and we're going to prove it right now. So I wanted to take every wide receiver that they've drafted since 2013 in the top 4 rounds of each draft. And I wanted to find what their peak year was. So in 2013, player named Marcus Wheaton. I remember him. Steelers fans probably remember him. The majority of you probably don't remember him because he never crossed 1,000 yards, was never very relevant in fantasy. He was a 3rd round pick, peaked in his 3rd year. 2014, Martavis Bryant. Probably more people remember this guy. Martavis Bryant, 4th round pick, peaked in his 2nd year. And he's had, he got kicked out of the league a couple times, and after basically being out of the league for 5 years, he's on the Dallas Cowboys now. 2015, Sammy Coates, 3rd round pick. Probably a lot of people don't know that name. He peaked in his 2nd year, never crossed 1,000 yards. James Washington, 2018. Juju Smith-Schuster, 2017. Obviously, most people know that name. 2nd round pick that year. Peaked in his 2nd year, and at that time, we thought he was going to be an elite wide receiver in Dynasty. And look at where he's at now. Do you even have him as a roster? Is he on the waiver wire? Wouldn't surprise me. 2018, James Washington, 3rd round. A lot of people may not know this guy. Oklahoma State product. I liked him in college, but knew he probably wasn't going to work in the NFL, and he didn't. Peaked in his 2nd year. 2019, Deontay Johnson. Obviously, active player. People know who this guy is. 3rd round pick. Peaked in his 3rd year, though. Hasn't crossed 1,000 yards receiving last 2 seasons. 2020, the infamous Chase Claypool that we all know and love so very much. 2nd round pick, peaked his rookie year. So if you look at all those guys, they all peaked in their 3rd to 2nd year. Basically, that's the median of what wide receivers in Pittsburgh are doing. And you look at all those guys, the only one remaining is Deontay Johnson. And Deontay Johnson's production has cratered. So the deeper point here, and I want to solidify this even deeper as to why I'm very convicted actually in selling George Pickens this offseason. The Pittsburgh Steelers culture is not good. It's not. Mike Tomlin has been that coach for a long time. And I am not saying that Mike Tomlin is a bad coach. But just look at the guys on that list I just gave you who actually are talented, right? So we're going to pull out Marcus Wheaton. We're going to pull out Sammy Coates. We're going to pull out James Washington. Let's hone in on Martavis Bryant, Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay, and Chase Claypool. Martavis Bryant, bad attitude player, had some issues with some substances, right? Not going to fault him for that, right? Martavis Bryant left the league. He was out of the league for 5 years, right? Juju Smith-Schuster quickly became just a player who did not care about football that much. Deontay Johnson, I think he cares, but Deontay Johnson, a lot of just stupidity in moves that he makes when he's on the field, and really, from what I've seen from Pittsburgh media, is not too well liked in his locker room. And Chase Claypool is obviously a joker in the league. The Pittsburgh Steelers do not have a good locker room culture. So that, I believe, is one of the major reasons that you see wide receivers in Pittsburgh start to crater after their first couple years in the league. Like it or hate it, like that idea, hate that idea, let me know in the comments below. That's what the comment section is there for. But long story short, sell George Pickens for value, because after a big season like that, the talent we all know he is, this guy could easily go for a back-end first-round pick. Easily. George Pickens is going to decline. The quarterback situation is still terrible. Their culture is just not very good. It has not been since Dan Rooney Sr. passed away and Art Rooney took over the Pittsburgh Steelers. I am a big believer in selling George Pickens today. The last guy on the list right here, I know we're going to get pushback here as well. Listen, on any sell high video, you're going to see some pushback, and I'm fully expecting of that. And I like it. I like to have open dialogue with you guys. Rashad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I believe, is a great sell high candidate this year. Listen, Rashad White is in a situation in Tampa Bay where he's coming off a top 10 running back season, and he handled a lot of work in 2023. He handled about 350 opportunities in 2023. Over 300 touches he handled. And listen, the numbers are pretty good when you see him on the screen. Like, they're good numbers that he put up. You know, he was basically 14 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. Let me tell you the reason why I just believe this is a good time to sell him. So Rashad White is a player that in his rookie season, I was never too big on. And the reason why is because this guy doesn't have a season where he has averaged 4 yards per carry or over. He's averaged under 4 yards per carry both seasons so far. Now, I'm not saying that's all on the player. I think a lot of it has to do with Tampa Bay's offensive line constantly getting injured and just really not super talented outside of Tristan Wirfs. Rashad White had the same opportunities, even more so, and he 3.6 yards per carry again. Rashad White, the only really good thing I like about him is that he is a pass catcher. He has been since college. So Rashad White is 100% going to have value in the eyes of most. Rashad White is 25 years old. He plays for a team that just lost another very good offensive coordinator, Canales, now with the Carolina Panthers, their head coach. Coaching matters a lot, and I think it's going to affect Rashad White. And again, it's not that he's old. 25 years old is not a bad age, but it is close to the age where you prefer to sell a running back in Dynasty. I think coming off a big year in Dynasty, this is a player I don't believe is going to continue to be a top 10 guy. I think he peaked. I think we will look back on this one very similarly to David Montgomery with Chicago. David Montgomery in 2020 had the 1 year where he was top 5 running back in full PPR. Did he do it again in Chicago? No, he did not. He's doing okay now with Detroit because they have a much better offensive line and a much better offensive situation. I think we're looking at a David Montgomery situation here with Rashad White. I would advise to sell him. You could get some draft capital for this guy. And even get a younger or veteran running back who can be a placeholder for you for a year. Aaron Jones, that guy comes to mind. Derrick Henry. But make sure you're getting draft capital for him. Because I believe that you could get, at the very least, a high second-round pick or a couple of them. And at most, I think you can get a mid-round first-round pick this year. So I would go ahead and trade Rashad White now while the iron is hot. As always, let me know what you think of these guys in the comments below. What questions you need answered for Dynasty Fantasy Football. I already know we're getting some pushback on this video. I can't wait to address it. If you're looking to evaluate some of the top tight ends in Dynasty Fantasy Football and where they're ranked exactly in Dynasty, click on this video right here for the top 12 tight end rankings in Dynasty.